Captain Li Bin was drinking his morning coffee when the alarm started beeping. He had been flying cargo ships for 15 years, and emergency signals always made his stomach drop. The sunrise was 3 days into a routine supply run to the mining colonies when the call came through. "Captain, we're getting something weird," said Kim Sol from the communications desk. Her fingers danced across the control panel, trying to clean up the signal. "It's really weak, like it's coming from far away." Li Bin walked over and listened to the crackling noise coming through the speakers. At first it sounded like static, but then the ship's computer started translating bits and pieces. A robotic voice spoke the words, "Cold, dying, help." "Where's it coming from?" Li Bin asked. Kim Sol checked her screens. "Keth 7, sir. That frozen moon about 2 hours from here." Everyone on the bridge went quiet. Keth 7 was famous for being one of the coldest places in the sector. The surface temperature stayed at minus 200 degrees all year round. Nothing lived there. Nothing could live there. "Are you sure that's right?" Li Bin asked. "Yes, sir. The signal is definitely coming from Keth 7's surface." Park Han, their engineer, looked up from his coffee. "Captain, that doesn't make sense. No ship goes to Keth 7. There's nothing there but ice and rock." The distress call played again through the speakers. This time they could hear more words. "Ship crashed. Heating failed. Please." Li Bin felt his chest tighten. Someone was trapped on that frozen moon, and their heating system had broken. Down. In those temperatures, they would freeze to death in hours. "How long would it take us to get there?" he asked Kim Sol. "About 2 hours if we push the engines hard. And how long for a proper rescue ship to reach them?" Kim Sol did some quick calculations. The nearest rescue station is at Gamma Base. They'd need at least 3 days to get a team ready and fly out there. 3 days. Li Bin looked at the star map showing Keth 7's position. Whoever was sending that signal wouldn't last 3 days in that cold. Park Han shook his head. "Captain, we're not a rescue ship. We're carrying farm supplies to the colonies. We don't have medical equipment or survival gear for extreme cold." "He's right," Kim Sol added. "Protocol says we should report this to the authorities and let them handle it." Li Bin listened to the distress call one more time. Behind the static and broken translation, he could hear something that made him forget about protocols and procedures. He could hear fear, real desperate fear from someone who knew they were going to die. "Kim Sol, send our cargo manifest to the colonies and tell them we'll be late," Li Bin said firmly. "Sir, set course for Keth 7, maximum speed." Park Han stood. "Captain, are you sure about this? We could get in serious trouble for abandoning our route." Li Bin walked back to his captain's chair and buckled in as the ship began to turn. "Park Han, if that was you trapped on that ice ball, wouldn't... You want someone to come?" The engineer thought for a moment, then nodded and went back to his station. As the sunrise changed course toward the frozen moon, Li Bin wondered what they would find when they got there. But one thing was certain. He couldn't ignore someone, calling for help no matter what the rules said. As the sunrise flew toward Keth 7, Kim Sol couldn't sit still. She kept checking her instruments and shaking her head. Finally, she unbuckled from her seat and walked over to Captain Li Bin. "Captain, I need to say something," she started, her voice serious. "This is a really bad idea." Li Bin looked up from the navigation charts he was studying. "Go ahead, Kim Sol, what's on your mind?" "We're breaking about 12 different space regulations right now. We abandoned our cargo route without permission. We're entering restricted space around Keth 7, and we're attempting a rescue operation without proper training or equipment." Park Han looked up from his engineering station. "She's right, Captain. I've been thinking about this too. Our ship wasn't built for rescue work. We don't have medical scanners, emergency life support pods, or even basic first aid supplies for unknown species." Kim Sol nodded. "The proper procedure is to report the distress signal to Sector Command and let trained rescue teams handle it. That's what the rules exist for." Li Bin listened quietly while his crew voiced their concerns. They weren't wrong. The Sunrise was a cargo hauler designed to carry supplies between colonies. Their medical bay was just a small room with basic human first aid equipment. They had never dealt with alien species before. "How long did you say it would take for a real rescue team to get there?" Li Bin asked. 3 days minimum, Kim Sol replied. "Maybe 4 if they need to gather special equipment." The distress signal played again through the ship's speakers. The automated translation was getting clearer as they got closer to the source. Temperature dropping. Life support failing. Anyone? Please respond. Park Han ran his hands through his hair. Captain, even if we reach them, what then? We don't know anything about their biology. What if our ship's atmosphere is poison to them? What if our heat settings are wrong for their species? And what about the cold? Kim Sol added. Keth 7's surface temperature will freeze our shuttle. Systems in minutes. We'd need special cold weather gear that we don't have. Li Bin stood up and walked to the main view screen, where Keth 7 was getting bigger as they approached. The moon looked like a giant white ball, covered completely in ice and snow. Nothing moved on its surface. Nothing could survive there for long. You're both right, he said finally. We're not equipped for this. We could fail. We could even get ourselves killed trying. Kim Sol looked relieved. So we'll contact Sector Command and... But, Li Bin continued, turning back to face his crew, someone is dying down there right now. Not in 3 days. Right now. The bridge went quiet except for the humming of the ship's engines and the occasional crackle of the distress signal. Park Han broke the silence. Captain, what if it's a trap? What if someone is using a fake distress signal to lure ships into that system? Then we'll deal with that when it happens, Li Bin said. But I listened to that voice and I don't think anyone could fake that kind of fear. Kim Sol tried one more time. Sir, our insurance won't cover this. If something goes wrong, the company could fire all of us. Li Bin walked back to his captain's chair and sat down. Kim Sol, 30 years from now, when you're old and telling stories to your grandchildren, do you want to tell them about the time you followed all the rules perfectly? Or do you want to tell them about the time you helped save someone's life? Kim Sol looked at Park Han, who shrugged and gave her a small smile. All right, Captain, she said, returning to her station. But I'm logging everything in the ship's record. When we get court-martialed, at least they'll know exactly how crazy we all were. Li Bin smiled as Keth 7 grew larger on their screen. Fair enough. Now let's go find whoever's calling for help. The shuttle landed with a heavy thud on Keth 7's icy surface. Even through the thick walls, Li Bin could feel the bitter cold trying to get inside. The outside temperature gauge showed minus 190 degrees, cold enough to freeze a person solid in minutes. There, Kim Sol pointed through the shuttle window. I can see something. About 200 meters away, a strange ship was buried nose first in a snowbank. It didn't look like any human vessel Li Bin had ever seen. The hull was smooth and curved, almost like it had been grown instead of built. Black scorch marks showed where something had exploded, and one wing was completely torn off. That's definitely not one of ours, Park Han said, checking his cold weather suit one more time. Li Bin sealed his helmet and checked the others. Remember, we can only stay outside for 20 minutes before our suits start failing. Move fast. They opened the shuttle door and stepped into the most hostile environment any of them had ever experienced. Even with their protective suits, Li Bin could feel the cold trying to find ways inside. Their boots crunched on ice so hard it sounded like walking on glass. The crashed ship's emergency hatch was stuck, but Park Han managed to force it open with a crowbar. Warm air rushed out and instantly turned into a cloud of steam in the freezing atmosphere. The heating system is still working a little, Park Han said, but not for much longer. They climbed inside and immediately knew they weren't dealing with humans. The corridors were too narrow, the ceiling too low, and everything had a strange blue glow coming from panels in the walls. Hello, Li Bin called out. We received your distress signal. We're here to help. A weak voice answered from deeper in the ship. It sounded like wind chimes mixed with someone trying to talk through water. They followed the voice to what looked like the ship's bridge. Li Bin stopped and stared. 3 creatures lay on the floor, and they were unlike anything he had ever imagined. They looked like they were made of living crystal, clear, beautiful, and glowing with soft light from inside their bodies, but something was terribly wrong. The one who had answered their call was moving slowly, trying to sit up. Her crystal-like skin, which should have been clear and bright, was turning grey and dull. The other 2 weren't moving at all, and their bodies had already gone completely grey. Are we too late? Kim Sol whispered. The conscious alien looked up at them with large, multifaceted eyes like diamonds. When she spoke, her voice came through. Their suit translators. You came. I thought we would die alone. Li Bin knelt down next to her. Even through his gloves he could feel that she was ice cold. "What happened to your ship?" "Power core exploded," she said weakly. "Heat failed. My people. We cannot survive cold. We need warmth like you need air." Park Han was checking the other two aliens with a handheld scanner. He shook his head at Li Bin. They were gone. "What's your name?" Li Bin asked the survivor. "Velnara," she whispered. "Engineer, 3rd class, first time, away from home." Kim Sol was checking her suit's chronometer. "Captain, we need to move now. Our suits are already losing heat and the shuttle's systems will start failing soon." Li Bin looked at Velnara. She was barely conscious, and more of her crystal body was turning grey every second. He had no idea how to help an alien made of living crystal, but he knew one thing for certain: she would die if they left her here. "Can you walk?" he asked her. I will try." Li Bin and Kim Sol carefully lifted Velnara to her feet. She weighed almost nothing, but her body was so cold it hurt to touch even through their insulated gloves. "Hurry," she whispered as they helped her toward the exit. "So cold, so very cold." Getting Velnara back to the shuttle was harder than Li Bin expected. Every step on the icy surface was a struggle, and Velnara kept stumbling. Her crystal body was getting colder and grayer with each passing minute. "I can't feel my legs," she whispered through the translator. "Everything is fading." Halfway to the shuttle, Velnara collapsed completely. Li Bin caught her before she hit the ice, but he could see she was dying. The grey color was spreading up from her feet, and the light inside her crystal body was getting dimmer. "Captain, her body temperature is dropping too fast," Kim Sol said, checking her scanner. "Even inside our shuttle, I don't think we can warm her up in time." Li Bin looked at Velnara's face. Her diamond-like eyes were closing, and she wasn't responding when he called her name. The cold was killing her faster than they could move. Without thinking about it, Li Bin started pulling off his thermal suit. "Captain, what are you doing?" Park Han shouted through the radio. "She needs more heat than we can give her," Li Bin said, his fingers working quickly on the suit's seals. "This is the only way. Sir, you'll freeze to death in minutes without that suit." Li Bin ignored him and pulled off the thick outer layer of his protection. The cold hit him like a punch to the chest, making him gasp. But he wrapped the warm suit around Velnara's crystal body, holding her close to transfer as much heat as possible. The effect was immediate. Some color started returning to Velnara's crystal skin, and the light inside her grew a little brighter. Kim Sol saw what Li Bin was doing and made her own quick decision. "Park Han, there's another alien in the ship that's still breathing, barely, but she's alive." "What? I thought they were both dead." "The scanner shows a very weak heartbeat. If we move fast..." Kim Sol was already running back toward the crashed ship, her boots slipping on the ice. Li Bin wanted to stop her, but he couldn't let go of Velnara. The cold was attacking Li Bin's exposed body with vicious intensity. His teeth started chattering uncontrollably, and he could feel his fingers going numb. But Velnara was getting warmer in his arms, and that was all that mattered. "Stay with me," he told her, his breath forming clouds of ice crystals in the air. "We're going to get you home." Kim Sol emerged from the crashed ship carrying the second alien. This one was smaller and completely grey, but Kim Sol had wrapped her own thermal suit around the creature. "I can't believe I'm doing this," Kim Sol muttered, her body already shaking from the cold as they stumbled toward the shuttle. Park Han met them at the shuttle door, his face pale with worry. "You're both crazy. Get inside before you freeze solid." They climbed into the shuttle, and Park Han immediately cranked up the heat to maximum. Li Bin and Kim Sol were both turning blue from the cold, their lips purple and their hands shaking so badly they could barely hold onto the aliens. "Medical bay. Now," Park Han shouted, helping them carry the two crystal beings toward the back of the shuttle. As they lifted off from Keth 7's surface, Li Bin looked down at Velnara. Her crystal body was slowly returning to its clear, bright state, and her eyes were opening. You gave me your warmth," she said weakly. "But now you are cold. Why would you do this?" Li Bin smiled, even though his whole body was shivering. "Because you needed it more than I did." Velnara stared at him with her diamond eyes, clearly trying to understand what kind of creatures would risk their own lives for strangers they had never met before. Back on the Sunrise, chaos filled the cargo hold. Park Han had cleared out boxes of supplies and set up every heater they could find. The temperature was cranked up so high that sweat was pouring down his face, but it still wasn't enough for the crystal aliens. "We need more heat," Kim Sol shouted, her own body still shaking from the cold exposure on Keth 7. "Their body temperature is barely rising." Li Bin ignored his own pain and helped arrange heating lamps around Velnara and her crewmate. His fingers were white and stiff from frostbite, and he couldn't feel his toes at all, but he kept working. "Captain, you need medical attention," Park Han said, looking at Li Bin's blue-tinged skin. "Your core body temperature is dangerously low." "Not yet," Li Bin replied, through chattering teeth. "They come first." Velnara watched all of this with growing amazement. Even though she was weak and confused, she could see that the human captain was badly injured from helping her. His hands were swollen and discolored, and he moved like every step caused him pain. "Why?" she whispered to Kim Sol, who was adjusting another heating unit. "Why do you hurt yourselves for us?" Kim Sol paused in her work. She had never really thought about it before. "Because you needed help," she said simply. "What else would we do?" This answer made no sense to Velnara. In her species' culture, help always came with a price. Resources were traded, favors were owed, contracts were signed. Nothing was ever given freely, especially not at such personal cost. Park Han had rigged up a makeshift medical scanner to monitor the aliens' vital signs. "The bigger one is stable now," he announced. "Her body temperature is rising slowly. But the smaller one?" He shook his head. The second alien that Kim Sol had rescued was still completely grey and hadn't moved since they brought her aboard. Her crystal body showed no internal light at all. "What can we do?" Li Bin asked, stumbling slightly as he tried to adjust her position under the heat lamps. "Captain, please," Velnara said, struggling to sit up. "You are injured. You must care. For yourself." "I'm fine," Li Bin lied, though his lips were still purple and his whole body was shivering uncontrollably. Velnara looked around the cargo hold that had been transformed into a medical bay. These humans had given up their own comfort, risked their safety, and were using all their ship's resources to save aliens they had never met before. The human captain was clearly suffering from severe cold exposure, but refused treatment while his patients needed care. "This is not normal behavior," she said to Park Han, who was checking her friend's pulse. "Your species, are you all like this?" Park Han looked confused. "Like what?" "Willing to sacrifice for strangers, willing to give without receiving." Park Han thought about it while he adjusted the heat settings. "I guess so. I mean, wouldn't anyone do the same thing?" This shocked Velnara even more. To Park Han, what they had done wasn't heroic or unusual. It was just the natural thing to do when someone needed help. Kim Sol brought over warm blankets that she had heated in their small galley oven. "Here, these should help," she said, wrapping them around both aliens despite her own body still recovering from the cold. "You are still cold yourself," Velnara observed, "yet you give us your warm coverings." "We'll be okay," Kim Sol said. "We can handle the cold better than you can." As the hours passed, Velnara watched the human crew work tirelessly to save her and her friend. They shared their food, their heat, their medical supplies, and their own body warmth without asking for anything in return. Li Bin finally allowed Park Han to treat his frostbite only after both aliens showed steady improvement. "I do not understand your species," Velnara told Li Bin as he sat with bandaged hands, finally accepting care for his injuries. "What don't you understand?" he asked. "How you can give so much and ask for nothing back?" Li Bin smiled, even though his face was still pale from the cold exposure. "Maybe that's just what makes us human." 3 days later, Velnara was strong enough to walk around the Sunrise on her own. Her crystal body had returned to its clear, bright state, and the inner light that made her people so beautiful was shining again. But her mind was full of questions that wouldn't go away. She found Kim Sol in the ship's small recreation room, eating lunch and reading a book on her tablet. Velnara had learned that humans needed regular meals to maintain their energy, unlike her people, who absorbed nutrients from heat and light. "May I sit with you?" Velnara asked, her voice still carrying that wind chime quality that the translators couldn't quite capture. Of course, Kim Sol said, moving over to make room on the bench. How are you feeling today? Much better, thanks to all of you. Velnara settled beside her, her crystal body making tiny tinkling sounds as she moved. But I have been thinking about something that confuses me. Kim Sol put down her tablet. What's that? Why did you help us? Velnara asked directly. I have asked this question many times, but your answers make no sense to me. Kim Sol laughed softly. What do you mean they don't make sense? When I ask why you risked your lives for strangers, you say, because you needed help. When I ask why you gave us your heat suits, you say, because you were cold. When I ask why you shared your food and medicine, you say, because you were hungry. And hurt. Right, Kim Sol nodded. Those are the reasons. Velnara's diamond eyes reflected the light in patterns that showed her frustration. But those are not reasons. Those are just descriptions of what happened. I want to know the real reason. What benefit did you expect to gain? Kim Sol sat down her sandwich and looked at Velnara carefully. What do you mean, what benefit? In my culture, when someone provides aid, there is always an exchange. Resources for resources, services for services, labor for labor. Nothing is given without something received in return. Velnara's voice became more animated as she explained, So when you helped us, what did you expect us to give you back? Kim Sol was quiet for a moment, trying to understand what Velnara was asking. We didn't expect anything back. That is impossible, Velnara said firmly. No intelligent species gives valuable resources without compensation. Your captain nearly died from cold exposure. You abandoned your cargo route and risked punishment. From your employers, you used your ship's fuel and supplies. Surely you calculated what payment would make these costs worthwhile. Kim Sol shook her head. Velnara, we didn't help you because we wanted something from you. We helped you because you were going to die if we didn't. But why does that matter to you? Velnara pressed. We were strangers. We had never met before. Our species had no existing trade agreements or alliances. There was no logical reason for you to care whether we lived or died. Kim Sol found herself struggling to explain something she had never really thought about before. I guess it matters because you're alive, because you can think and feel and experience things just like we can. So if we could save your life and we chose not to, then we'd be responsible for your death. We'd have to live knowing that we let someone die when we could have prevented it. Velnara stared at Kim Sol for a long time. You would feel guilty. Yes. Exactly. But guilt is just an emotional response. It has no practical value. Why would you make decisions based on feelings rather than logical cost-benefit analysis? Kim Sol realized she was getting into deep philosophical territory that she wasn't sure she could navigate. Velnara, have you ever seen someone in pain and wanted to make it stop even if you didn't know them? No, Velnara answered honestly. Unknown individuals' pain has no relevance to my well-being or goals. Well, humans are different. When we see someone suffering, especially if we can help, something inside us, it hurts too. We can't just ignore it and walk away. Velnara processed this information slowly. You are saying that your species experiences emotional distress when witnessing the distress of strangers. Yes. And this emotional response is strong enough to override your survival instincts and logical decision-making? Sometimes, yes. Velnara sat back, her crystal body shimmering as she tried to comprehend this revelation. In her species' thousands of years of civilization, they had never encountered anything like this. The idea that an intelligent species would risk their own welfare for unrelated individuals seemed impossible. Your species is very strange, she said finally. Kim Sol smiled. Maybe, but it's worked out pretty well for us so far. Later that evening, Velnara found Park Han in the engine room, running routine maintenance checks. The constant hum of the ship's power systems had become strangely comforting to her during her recovery. She had learned that humans found mechanical sounds soothing, unlike her people who preferred complete silence. Park Han, she said, her crystal voice cutting through the engine noise. May I ask you something? Park Han looked up from the control panel he was adjusting. Sure, what's on your mind? Kim Sol told me that humans help strangers because you feel emotional pain when you see others suffering. But I find this hard to believe. Are you certain this behavior is common among your species? Park Han wiped his hands on a rag and leaned against the engine housing. Oh, it's definitely common. Actually, let me tell you some stories that might help you understand. He pulled up a small stool and sat down, settling in for a longer conversation. When I was a kid, maybe 8 years old, there was a huge earthquake on my home planet. Buildings collapsed, power went out, people were trapped under rubble. Velnara listened intently, her diamond eyes reflecting the engine room's lights. Within hours, people started showing up to help, Park Han continued. Not just emergency workers, regular people, shopkeepers, teachers, office workers, even children. They came with shovels, medical supplies, food, blankets. They worked for days, digging people out of collapsed buildings. Were these people paid for their labor? Velnara asked. Nope. They just came because they heard people needed help. Some of them traveled hundreds of kilometers just to dig through rubble for strangers they'd never meet again. Velnara's crystal body shimmered with confusion. That makes no economic sense. Park Han smiled. Here's another one. Last year there was a story on the news about a woman who saw a burning apartment building. She ran inside, not once but 4 times, to carry out families she didn't know. She got badly burned doing it. Was she a professional rescue worker? No. She was a baker. She was just walking by when she saw the fire. Park Han stood up and continued his maintenance work while he talked. And then there's medical donations. Humans regularly give blood to strangers who need it. Some people donate bone marrow, which is painful and takes weeks to recover from. Others donate kidneys to people they've never met. They give away their organs? Velnara sounded shocked. A kidney, yes. Humans can live with just one, so some people give their spare kidney to save someone else's life. Velnara was quiet for several minutes, processing this information. These people who donate organs, what do they receive in return? Nothing, usually. Well, maybe a thank you letter. Nothing else? No payment, no social status, no political advantage? Sometimes they don't even know who gets their organ. The doctors keep it anonymous. Park Han pulled up another story on his tablet. Here's my favorite one. During a war about 50 years ago, there was a city under siege. Food was running out and children were starving. Enemy pilots, people who were supposed to be fighting against that city, started dropping candy and supplies from their planes. For the kids. Enemy soldiers helped the people they were fighting. Yep. They couldn't stand the idea of children going hungry, even if those children belonged to the other side. Velnara stood up and began pacing, her crystal feet making soft, chiming sounds on the metal floor. This behavior, it goes against basic survival principles. It wastes resources, creates risks, provides no tangible benefits. That's true, Park Han agreed. But here's the thing. It makes us stronger as a species. How? Because when everyone knows that help will come when they need it, everyone feels safer. When people help each other, communities become stronger. When we take care of the weak and injured instead of abandoning them, we keep all our knowledge and experience instead of losing it. Park Han saved his work and turned to face Velnara. Directly. But honestly, most humans don't think about it that logically. We help people because we can't bear to watch them suffer when we have the power to stop it, even when helping is dangerous or costly, especially then. The bigger the need, the more we feel compelled to act. Velnara stopped pacing and looked at Park Han with her multifaceted eyes. Your species fascinates and terrifies me. You make decisions based on emotions rather than logic, yet you've managed to build starships and explore the galaxy. Park Han laughed. Maybe our emotions are more logical than you think, or maybe logic isn't the only way to make good decisions. For the first time since her rescue, Velnara began to understand that what had happened to her wasn't unusual human behavior. It was simply human nature. 5 days after the rescue, long-range sensors picked up an approaching ship. Kim Sol identified it immediately from its crystalline hull design. It was definitely from Velnara's species. That's the most beautiful ship I've ever seen, Park Han said, watching the vessel approach on the main screen. It looked like it had been carved from a single massive diamond, catching and reflecting light in ways that made it seem alive. Captain Li Bin, still wearing bandages on his frost-damaged hands, opened a communication channel. "Unknown vessel, this is Captain Li Bin of the cargo ship Sunrise. We have 2 survivors from your species aboard." The reply came in that distinctive wind chime voice that they had grown familiar with. "Captain Li Bin, this is Commander Zethval of the research vessel, Crystal Wind. We have been searching for Engineer Velnara and her crew for 6 days. We are grateful beyond measure that you found them. Within an hour, the crystalline ship had docked with the Sunrise." The airlock opened, and 3 tall crystal beings entered. They moved with an elegant grace that made them seem like living sculptures, their bodies reflecting the corridor lights in rainbow patterns. Commander Zethval was taller than Velnara, with deep blue crystal formations growing from her shoulders like wings. When she spoke, her voice carried authority and years of experience. "Where is Engineer Velnara?" she asked. "Right here, Commander," Velnara said, entering the docking bay. She looked completely healthy now, her crystal body clear and bright, showing no signs of her near-death experience on Keth 7. Commander Zethval examined Velnara carefully. "You appear to be in excellent condition. How is this possible? Our medical team expected to find you barely alive, if at all." "These humans saved my life," Velnara said simply. "They risked everything to rescue us from the Ice Moon." The commander turned to study Li Bin, Kim Sol, and Park Han. Her multifaceted eyes seemed to analyze every detail about them. "We have prepared a full medical facility aboard our ship. You will need extensive treatment to recover from your exposure to such extreme cold." "Actually, Commander," Velnara said quietly, "I would like to request permission to remain here longer." Everyone in the docking bay went silent. Commander Zethval's crystal body shifted colors slightly, showing her surprise. "Engineer Velnara, you have been through a traumatic experience. You need to return home for proper medical care and psychological evaluation." "I am not injured, Commander. These humans provided excellent care." Velnara looked at Li Bin and his crew. "But I have discovered something that I believe is important for our species to understand." "What have you discovered?" Velnara struggled to find the right words. "These humans. They are unlike any species we have encountered. They helped us without any expectation of reward or compensation. They risked their lives for strangers." Commander Zethval's expression showed skepticism. "Surely there was some mutual benefit arrangement." "No, Commander. I have questioned them extensively. They helped us purely because we needed help. This appears to be fundamental to their nature." Li Bin stepped forward. "Commander, Velnara is welcome to stay with us as long as she wants. We've enjoyed learning about her people, and she's been very helpful with our ship's systems." "You would allow an alien to remain on your vessel without compensation?" Park Han laughed. "She's good company, and she's been teaching us about crystal technology. It's been interesting." Commander Zethval looked between the humans and Velnara, clearly trying to understand the situation. "Engineer Velnara, what exactly do you hope to accomplish by staying with these humans?" "I want to study them, Commander. I want to understand how a species can survive and thrive while regularly sacrificing their own interests for others. This behavior should be evolutionary suicide, yet they have become one of the most successful species in this sector." Velnara moved closer to her commander. "What I witnessed here challenges everything we believe about intelligent behavior. If we can understand how humans think, it might change how we interact with other species." Commander Zethval was quiet for a long moment. Finally, she nodded. "Very well, you may remain here for 1 standard month to conduct your study, but you will report your findings to our Science Council." "Thank you, Commander." As the crystalline beings prepared to leave, Commander Zethval approached Li Bin. "Captain, our species owes you a debt that we cannot easily repay. You saved one of our brightest engineers." Li Bin smiled and extended his bandaged hand. "No debt necessary, Commander. We were just doing what anyone would do." Commander Zethval stared at his outstretched hand for a moment, then carefully shook it. "Perhaps that is exactly what Velnara needs to study." 6 months later, Velnara stood before the High Council of her homeworld, addressing the most important leaders of her crystalline civilization. The great hall was carved from a single massive crystal, and her voice echoed beautifully as she spoke. "Honored counselors," she began, her body glowing with confidence, "I have completed my study of the human species, and I must report findings that will challenge everything we thought we knew about intelligent behavior." The 12 council members sat in their crystal thrones, their ancient bodies showing the deep blue and purple colors that came with age and wisdom. Council leader Morthek spoke first. "Engineer Velnara, your preliminary reports have been difficult to believe. You claim these humans regularly sacrifice their own welfare for strangers." "Yes, Council leader, but it goes far deeper than that." Velnara activated a holographic display, showing images from her time aboard the Sunrise. "I have documented hundreds of examples of what they call helping others during my stay with them." The images showed Li Bin sharing his food with Velnara when she was too weak to eat their nutrient crystals. They showed Kim Sol teaching her human customs while patiently answering endless questions. They showed Park Han working extra shifts to modify the ship's systems for her comfort. "These humans did not help me because they expected payment or political advantage," Velnara continued. "They helped because they said I was their friend, and when I asked what obligations friendship created, they said none, only opportunities to help each other." Council member Yathara, known for her logical mind, spoke up. "This behavior makes no evolutionary sense. Species that waste resources on unrelated individuals should be eliminated by natural selection." "That is what I thought as well, Council member, but I was wrong." Velnara brought up new data. Humans have become one of the most successful species in their sector precisely because of this behavior, not in spite of it. The hologram showed human colonies, trade routes, and diplomatic relationships spanning dozens of star systems. "How is this possible?" asked Council leader Morthek. "Because when humans help others, those others remember. The species they save become their allies. The individuals they rescue become their friends. The communities they assist become their trading partners." Velnara's voice grew excited as she explained. "Their illogical kindness has created the largest voluntary alliance network in known space." She pulled up communication logs from the past months. "Since word of my rescue spread, 17 different species have contacted human authorities wanting to establish diplomatic relations. They all want to meet the species that risked their lives to save a stranger." Council member Zixel leaned forward. "You are suggesting we should adopt their methods?" "I am suggesting we should understand their methods. Humans do not help others. As a strategy, they help because they cannot bear to do otherwise. But the results speak for themselves." Velnara turned to address the full council. "I request permission to establish the first formal diplomatic relationship between our species and humanity. I volunteer to serve as our ambassador to their people." The council members shared glances, communicating through color changes in their crystal bodies. Finally, Council leader Morthek spoke. "This is a significant decision, Engineer Velnara. You would be asking us to trust a species whose behavior we do not understand. Honored Council leader, may I share with you the words I wrote in my final report?" "Proceed." Velnara's body glowed brighter as she quoted from memory. "Humans are impossible beings who give heat to strangers and somehow burn brighter for it. They pour their warmth into others and never grow cold. They share their light and never grow dim. They are living proof that kindness is not weakness, but the greatest strength any species can possess." The council chamber was silent for a long moment. Then Council leader Morthek stood. "Engineer Velnara, by unanimous decision of this council, you are hereby appointed as our first ambassador to the human species. May your friendship with Captain Li Bin and his crew be the foundation of a lasting alliance." As Velnara accepted her new role, she thought about that frozen day on Keth 7 when she had called out desperately for help. She never could have imagined that one human captain's choice to answer a stranger's cry would change the destiny of 2 civilizations. But then again, she was learning that humans specialized in doing the impossible.